I call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak on behalf of the Green Party on the Airport's Cost Recovery of Processing International Travellers Bill. In 2009, there were nearly 30,000 flights into New Zealand, bringing, amongst other things, 4.5 million people. As an island nation, our international air links are vitally important to our relations and our economic prosperity. This rather uncontroversial bill enables the Crown to recover the cost from aviation security, biosecurity and customs from new international airports and non-routine flights. Our biosecurity is vital to our economic well-being, and we must be vigilant to protect our primary production base from introduced pests and diseases. This bill is about protecting the Crown's potential liability from providing this service and internalises some of the enforcement costs, but myopically ignores the big issues facing us from international air travel. The bill focuses on the costs and the liabilities, but the nature of most of the legislation going through this House, it takes a narrow view. The bill focuses solely on the financial costs, ignoring all the other costs in question on the subject we are discussing tonight. The bill ignores the costs of aviation on the climate, the costs paid from people right now facing rising sea levels and extreme weather events. It ignores the cost to the environment from pollution as a result from international air travel, and it ignores the social costs people pay living under, next to airports. Like so much in our society, when we talk about costs, we simply ignore the environmental costs, the externalities, which are real but unmeasured and unvalued when we focus exclusively on only the financial costs. The Greens will be voting for this bill, and we welcome the modest intent that international travellers arriving in a new international airport should pay the fair share of the public services so essential, like biosecurity, but we lament the parliamentary time spent focusing on the minutiae while we face the clear and present danger of climate change and one of its major causes. Climate change is already the greatest threat facing the planet, and it's not just the polar bears and the penguins anymore, it's the poorest and the most vulnerable feeling the brunt of climate change. Former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan estimates right now 300,000 people are dying annually as a result of climate change. So tonight, as we discuss the costs, we ignore the real costs of climate change and one of its major growing causes, international air travel. Ironically, those 300,000 people estimated to be dying right now are almost certainly the poorest 63% of the planet, or the 4.2 billion people who will probably never ever travel an airplane in their lifetimes. Air travel is the world's fastest growing source of greenhouse gases, and globally those 16,000 commercial jet aircraft are emitting more than 600 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. All those planes flying at any one time are not just releasing carbon dioxide, but spewing a whole host of other gases into the troposphere, changing the atmosphere of the planet. Even in clean, green, 100% pure New Zealand, our international aviation emissions have increased 66% between 1990 and 2009. So tonight, if we're going to be honest, we should be discussing all the costs associated with international air travel, and we should be prepared to ask the hard questions. Do we want to grow, maintain or shrink our emissions from international travel? I love flying, and the Greens aren't opposed to flying, but the question is, who pays the true costs of our decisions to fly? And it's a genuine challenge to our country. We're a far-flung nation at the bottom of the world that makes our way in the world, exporting globally and having people come visit us. As 70,000 people prepare to fly to New Zealand for the Rugby World Cup, we need to be asking ourselves, what's the cost of how they get here? A return trip from the UK to New Zealand emits 7.6 tonnes of carbon dioxide. That's about the same as the per capita emissions of a Swedish citizens over the entire year. That's on just one trip. Many of these travellers will be flying to Auckland from the UK and already will be paying a distance-based environmental impact duty of around New Zealand $240. Landcare research found direct CO2 emissions from the tourism sector was massive. With over 4 million tonnes produced from aircraft, that's equivalent to a quarter of our nation's CO2 emissions across the entire economy, but those costs just aren't counted. As it stands, under the 1944 Chicago Convention and the 4,000 treaties it's being written into since, it protects international air travel from all excise taxes, and global climate negotiations have ignored it in their deal globally, despite the significance of air travel. No matter what people do in their lives, be it recycling, changing the light bulbs, taking the bus, it all quickly comes to naught if they're still flying around the world for shopping trips to Sydney, quick winter breaks to the island, or short term long-haul flights. If we're serious about protecting the climate, we can't keep growing air travel. As the UK-based Tyndall Centre research shows, if we want to keep the government's albeit inadequate 450 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere target and want to continue flying, we're going to have to reduce to zero all the other emissions in our economy. That's from cars, that's from electricity, from energy, and it's plainly ridiculous. As MPs who have unlimited flying privileges, we must lead the debate on how we reduce our emissions from air miles. So whilst planes have become more efficient over time, we're still essentially dependent on a 1940s engine design, and we're already reaching close to the limits of efficiency gains. At the same time, we're massively increasing the number and the kilometres of flights. In the UK in 1970, British airports were used by around 32 million people. In 2004, the figure was 216 million, and by 2030, the government there is predicting a mind-boggling 500 million trips through their airports. We can't keep growing like this on a finite planet. Alternative fuels like biofuels may play a role, but all of them so far have environmental costs and social costs. Biofuels contribute to rising food prices, which gives us a stark choice between the stomachs of the poor or the pleasures of the rich. As George Monbiot says, there's no techno fix to the disastrous impact of air travel on the environment. So tonight, as we discuss the airport's cost recovery of processing of international travellers' bill, we ignore the real costs of international air travel. We should be asking, however, is air travel too cheap? Should there be a tax on fuel? Should it be included in global climate treaties? Should we limit growth? Should we stay where we are or even try to reduce the number of flights? We should be focusing on sustainable alternatives for air travel. We should be preparing alternative strategies since our economy is just so dependent on our international air links. So whilst tonight I've talked about climate change, Mr. Speaker, which is impacting us in our own times and gives us reason to act alone, reducing the amount of international air travel may be forced on us. Already the price of oil has topped US $120 a barrel, and recently the International Air Transport Association have warned that airline industry profits will be reduced by half this year because globally they're facing a $166 billion fuel bill. In 2008, when the price of oil skyrocketed similar to now, nearly 25 airlines globally hit the dust. Kiwi motorists are already feeling the pinch at the pump, as are the international air industry, and as insecurity spreads in the Middle East, thanks to people's revolutions against dictators propped up by Western nations to ensure their access to cheap fuels, as we near the natural reality of peak oil and enter a series of oil price shock recessions followed by supply crunches causing further recessions, that pinch is going to hit further. So in summary, Mr. Speaker, we need to look at the cost of the end of cheap oil will have on us, the cost of climate change, the cost of pollution, not just the financial cost. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, as we focus on these issues, we have to ask ourselves, is this Parliament like a traveller sitting in an airplane, looking over a beautiful view out the window, but instead focusing just on that dirty dot on the window? Kia ora.
Colin King.